we focused, it's very powerful and generic and used for lots of different things. So we focused again on developing deeper content knowledge for students in that area rather than jumping around to different techniques. And so I think that helped also because students were able to build up, I think, the deeper base of knowledge and be able to evaluate that technique a little bit better, variations on it. Okay, so this is what we sort of stumbled upon, and I'm sure it can be improved. The kind of papers that we were asking students to read, what we wanted them to focus on, or what are the main questions that are that the study that's published is trying to address. Identify what the methods are, identify the results. So we know that students in general at this stage seem to have problems distinguishing data from inferences that can be made from those. So we specifically asked them to look at results and conclusions or interpretations separately and try to distinguish those things. And that was very difficult for students at the beginning, but they were able to improve that. And then we did ask them, even though many of them did not feel very comfortable with this at the beginning, to try to, as best they could, try to reconcile, see if the data supported the conclusions. And so again, that was something that we asked students to do, but we were aware that they may not be very successful at that at first. So this is something that we gave to students. We did a short sort of interactive lecture on how students, the structure of some of the different kinds of papers we were asking them to read, the purpose of different sections of papers in general. And we did that, and then we gave them these focus questions, and we asked them to read, use these and respond to these in writing, as well as then in class having discussions with their peers after this. So I want to just add that Becky modified this. She actually taught the geologic writing, a 1-credit course that all of her majors are required to take. And she modified this and used it extensively and successfully in her course. So it seems to be something that, in general, is supportive. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm struggling a little bit with this last one about did the data support the conclusions, because you were highly selective in the papers that you picked. You picked what you called structurally sound, established papers. It seems to me that in all such papers, it's likely that a student would argue that the results support the conclusions. I mean, otherwise, it was an odd choice of paper. So how are they going to be able to do that, or to wrestle with that?
That's a good question. I guess there's a culture of, particularly in the graduate level courses that read papers, there often, in my experience, there tends to be, in geology and in biology, there tends to be a culture that develops of being overly critical of papers. And so you get together to discuss a paper, and all you're doing is reaming the paper for all the things that it appears to have done wrong. So we wanted to counter that, and it's also, I think, a misunderstanding, misapplication of the word critical, right? We're not criticizing the papers in a non-thoughtful way. We want students to be critical of the aspects that
but you
which the claims
helping
aren't good.
To find those things that we,
yes,
as graduate students and professionals do, which is to say, oh, but they didn't control for this variable.
But couldn't you say, in what ways do the data support the conclusions?
Maybe that's more
in that
effective.
way,
that
would
would
be a fun question to answer.
It would be odd to find any of these papers where the data don't, in some respects, support the conclusions.
But to be able to talk about how is a different question,
That's right.
which is a fun one for all of us.
I think actually we were asking how, and that's the kind of thing that we focused on in discussion, was more what, is there something about the method that you might want to be aware of that may have, you don't want to go too far. Do the claims they're making actually, do they go too far with the data or not? And so I think the how is a better,
in what ways,
do it.
if at all?
One question that seems to be absent is, are the results credible? And if so, why?
Right.
I mean,
the results credible, not the conclusions.
The results, not what you do with them. There's
Right, are they believable, reproducible, understandable? Right.
So, I agree that that's something different. Is that something that, I guess I didn't think of that as being so so important in this case. I don't know that these students would be able to really evaluate those. And I
But-
guess that's where the careful
But
choice of papers comes
It's
in.
a key part of most scientific papers is somebody saying, I have
Right.
measured the acceleration due to gravity by this method, and here's
Yeah.
why you should believe me. That's a substantial part of it.
Well,
Or for
I think
instance,
that's a little
paper.
different. That sort of gets more into the here's why you should believe me. That's
Sure.
an important part, right? Sort of the argumentative part of
well,
why
it's also methods.
Oh, but,
It's an epistemological
it is.
question.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be dealt with when you're talking about papers. I think you have to select out certain things, and you can't do everything in a semester.
That was going to be my question. Is
Yeah.
this the list of top 5 things we would ask?
Right.
No,
You know,
I
it's
think
6.
that's a very good question.
So, and I don't know. It looks good to me, but I'm just sort of sitting here.
What are the other
thinking-
things that might should go on that list?
Right.
Better way to say it.
Right.
And also, you can answer these questions without being a content expert. But the question about most of these questions, the question about whether or not I trust the experiment requires a little bit more understanding of the content itself. So
I would agree with
this
that.
gets towards the thinking aspect, the critical thinking aspect, while the other one, the question about do I trust the data?
I mean, I
No,
think
it's not trusting the data. There's a
Trusting the
distinction between data and a result, too. I mean, the
Result is tied to the method.
result is different from data. And, you know,
well, I mean,
yeah.
is that true in all cases?
No, it's not true in all cases. In some cases, the result is obvious from merely observation.
Right.
But in other cases, to get from data to a result requires considerable analytic procedure.
So, I mean, I want to
And so-
say we did, in discussions we had, especially with students, and the discussions they had with each other, especially towards the end of the class, those issues did come up. In particular, this controversy over the age of the Grand Canyon. We focused on that for, I think, 3 weeks of the course. And so that did come up. There were issues with the technique, there were issues with the data. That students, we both tried to give them some background in why some people think this particular data might not be the best to use with this technique, or this new technique that was a little iffy. We tried to, give them some background in sort of what we thought of the community view, I guess, on that in some context. And the students did address those things, but they weren't part of the original sort of 5 things we asked students. Whether they should be or not, I guess that's another question.
Do you ever bring up the question of what aspects of this work might determine how much of an impact it has on the field? Yeah, I'm still worried about totally leaving out the idea that there is a scientific hierarchy, or there's a hierarchical structure of the scientific community, and that people in certain positions are taken more seriously than people in
Well,
other positions. And I've had students in critical
there
thinking
is
courses
that.
like this who get the idea that the thing to do is be critical, and they're simply, they're putting themselves up against an expert in the field and saying, well, I don't believe this. Who is this guy that told me this?
Yeah.
And they don't understand that there is a structure
Yeah.
that, at least at the start, determines how a result is received.
Wow.
Reputations.
Whew.
Yeah.
It seems
I
to me it's a
think
mistake to leave that out completely.
I don't know that we left it out. I don't think we focused on that explicitly, but we did try to build students to not going the critical route, but going sort of more of an analytical route.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
I think this is a critically important issue, but I think that it might, if we were to list top 5, it might be difficult to get at. As with, say, mine, which is, why does this matter or why do we care?
Right.
What's the impact of this work?
So I want to skip ahead and let's see. Actually, I'm going to pass this out. This is their directions for their final paper, and that's not the best one. I do want to address that in their final project, their final paper that they gave a presentation on, and gave a presentation and wrote a paper. We did ask them about the significance of the problem. why does this matter to anyone? And we asked them in their talks to explain that. So I guess this is a rubric that we had for, this was part of their research project. And so I'll just hand this out. It gives you an idea of the kind of things we were looking for, and maybe that will kind of answer that question a little bit. So I guess this is a good time to go into that. I'll try to, sorry to go too long.
That's our fault.
Cut me off when you have to go, or just leave, or whatever you need to do. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, comments, etc. I really appreciate it. So, when I'm talking about this final project that they needed to do, there was basically 4 parts. The first is they needed to come up with a title, and the title needed to reflect the problem that they were going to look at. And so the reason we asked them to give us their idea for their title and the problem that they wanted to talk about relatively early on. I'm going to pass out this other thing, and this is their directions, instructions for their final project. That gives you a sense of these different areas. We then asked them to write a research prospectus, and that's the thing you have the rubric for. This is meant to be a one-page focused thing where they state the problem or the controversial aspect, and they try to articulate those different things about what makes it problematic, what is the paper trying to say, why is this problem significant, etc. So we were trying to get them to think about why anyone should care about this particular problem in the scientific or general community. So I don't know if that quite answers
Anybody
or
do
addresses what's
the
going
dating
on.
of the origin of life?
I don't think anyone did that. Well, no, they did to some extent, yes. I think 2 students actually did address that.
Because that's a huge controversy.
And one of the students is currently working with one of our faculty who does
Steve.
research on that area. Yeah, well, we had one of his students in our class.
So this is going back to the original structure of the class, which is to identify controversial issues.
Well,
Is that right? Well, or scientific issues and scientific debate, and then they're applying the methodology that they learned from
That's
reading
right.
papers.
yeah.
But you present the instructions early on so that you have a chance to give them some guidance and
Right.
develop.
So the course was
Before they
still
have to start.
operating, I mean, the content was still these controversial problems or areas. That was sort of the means by which the papers were assigned.
Right.
That was the framework.
But the focus shifted from
Right.
understanding the nature of the controversies to being able to glean
Right.
what the scientific arguments are. Okay.
What else to say? I mean,
Well, I think this is really good. I mean, just to play on that a little bit,
yeah,
I think it would be awful if the class were to say, okay, what's the structure of a scientific argument? Regurgitate it to me now, because then it just becomes another school-based activity, which is alienating to the students. Whereas this way, they apply that knowledge of what scientific arguments are, become instrumental tools to answer this other question of state what controversial.
well, that certainly was what we were hoping, that at least some students would be able to get to that point. So I think the main thing I want to say here is that instead of having, when we wanted them to apply this, we didn't just let them loose and then accept their final product. We wanted to give them as many opportunities for feedback from us and from their peers as possible. And the other thing was, we wanted it to be manageable. It wasn't meant to be some hideous project that students needed to do. We wanted them to use the problems and the context they had used in class. And so, because both Becky and I have content knowledge in this area that's pretty extensive, we wanted to point them to papers if they were struggling. We wanted to be able to do that. We didn't want it to be a minefield at all for them. And in some cases it did become, and we tried to step in and help them shift their topic a little bit. We also wanted it to not be just I mean, obviously, maybe not obvious, but from the documents, we didn't want it to be a just so story about something. We wanted it to be problem focused and thesis oriented, and we wanted them to be evaluative about what was going on. Not all of them were able to really achieve that.